Welcome to our podcast. We're back. Father Charles Murr. I'm Robert Moynihan, the editor of Inside the Vatican magazine. Father Murr is a longtime scholar of church history and a priest who has been serving in different parts of the world, in Rome, in Mexico, and in New York City. Today, we're talking about the keys of Peter, which are the keys granted to him by Jesus Christ, and making him the leader, the teacher of the church. And then the question that arises when there is some problem with Peter's teaching or Peter's action, as there was a problem even before Christ was arrested, and the night he was arrested, when Peter denied that he even knew Jesus. And this has arisen because an American bishop, Bishop Strickland of Tyler, Texas, has said that he rejects the program of undermining the deposit of faith of Pope Francis. Father Murr, are we going to be able to discuss this question?
I think so. Calmly and rationally, I think so.
Does a bishop have the right to call out the Pope and say, I reject your program, which is undermining the deposit of the faith?
Well, why don't we begin by defining a couple terms, okay?
All right.
Let's start by defining the deposit of faith. The deposit of the faith, or the deposit of faith. What is that? That is what we as Catholics are obliged to believe. Every part of our faith we're obliged to believe. From the apostles, from the time of Jesus Christ, through the apostles, through the magisterium of the church, the fathers of the church, the magisterium of the church, all the way to the present. What has been handed down from generation to generation as a deposit of the faith. It is what we believe as Catholics. Mm-hmm. That basically, Robert, would be in the creed that we pray every Sunday at Mass, the Nicene Creed, also the Apostles' Creed, and every article of faith we believe. This is the deposit of faith. Everything that has been transmitted from generation to generation through 2,000 years of Catholic history, of church history, to the present. As Catholics, and I'll tell you this, as a Catholic before I was a priest, and now after being ordained a priest, I have held to everything that the church teaches. And when I don't understand something, I make it my business to study, to learn, and to accept. And I'll tell you something else too, now that we're on sort of open confessions here. There have been some times in my own personal journey where I have found something particularly difficult to believe of our faith. What do you do in that circumstance? The first thing you do, and I don't mean this to sound like an easy cop-out, because it's not. You pray. You pray for what? Pray to be able to accept what the faith is teaching, because that is the truth. I, Charles Murr, don't contain the truth. You, Robert Moynihan, don't contain the truth. None of us do individually. The truth is Christ Jesus, who said he was the truth. And the deposit of faith is the truth of the faith that we need. So I don't want to change the truth of the faith to accommodate me. I want to change me to accommodate the truth. Mm-hmm. Any parish that I've ever been in, Robert, the first homily, and you can talk to New Yorkers about this, people in Guadalajara, any place if you wish, that I've ever been. My first sermon or homily that I give is the following. If you hear anything coming out of my mouth that is not Catholic, or that does not contain the elements of the Catholic faith, or does not speak the Catholic truths, you're to report to me immediately. And if I don't change those things, you're to report to my superior or to the bishop, because I want to be a Catholic priest. I want to be the priest that I was ordained to be. I'm not here to preach the gospel according to Charlie. That's not it. I'm here to preach and teach the gospel of Jesus Christ as given to the apostles and given to the church at whole. That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here for. That is the deposit of faith. And there's one other thing too. I get a kick out of a lot of our the televangelists. Every once in a while, I watch them for entertainment value, and they're praying for new Cadillacs. I heard one say one time. I couldn't believe this. I thought they were kidding. He said, "When you pray for that new Cadillac that you want, and don't forget to include the color." Well, I mean, this is absurd. This is absolutely absurd. It's an outrage. However, you could be sure that if you pray for a new Cadillac, you're not going to get the new Cadillac. But if you pray for something spiritual, for a spiritual good and a spiritual gift, for example, patience, understanding, a more concise, a deepening of your faith. If you pray for anything spiritual, you can almost be sure that God's going to give that to you. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. So I'm being long-winded on this, but the deposit of faith is everything that we have received from the time of Christ, the apostles, the fathers of the church, all the way to today. It is the articles of faith that cannot, let me repeat that, cannot change. They cannot change. We could live another 5,000 years. There will still be three persons in the Blessed Trinity. There will not be four or two, right? And on and on and on. These are things that do not change. That's the deposit of faith. So now, let's go back to what Bishop Strickland is saying. And his remark is what?
Well, let's call up an image of the tweet that he sent out.
All right.
Can we have that on the screen? Okay. Here we have Bishop Tyler. I'm sorry, Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, in the Papal Palace with Pope Francis in better times, we might say. And let's look at the date at the very top. Can we go back up? Do we have a date here? No.
I think it was only last year.
Okay. Oh, Pope Francis greets Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, during a meeting with U.S. bishops from Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas during the ad limina visits to the Vatican, January 20th, 2020. That's just before COVID broke out. That's
Right.
3 years and a few months ago. Bishop Strickland tweeted on May 12th, 2023. So that's 4 days ago. This is why we're here. 4 days ago, just before May 13th, the anniversary of Fatima, Bishop Strickland tweeted, and let's see what he tweeted here, that he, quote, rejects, unquote, Pope Francis, quote, program of undermining the deposit of faith. Here's the headline. This is an OSV news story, Our Sunday Visitor, from Tyler, Texas. Let's stop here for a moment. Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, posted a controversial tweet on May 12th in which he said he believes, quote, Pope Francis is the Pope, close quote. So there he's taking a stand, as also he shook the Pope's hand. He's taking a stand with Pope Francis and acknowledging and affirming that he is the Pope of the Catholic Church, but added that, quote, it is time for me to say that I reject his program of undermining the doctrine of faith, close quote. So this is a dramatic moment. What we don't understand yet is whether this is a flame that will start a fire of opposition to Pope Francis, or whether we can understand this as a kind of idiosyncratic moment which isn't historically important And that's why we're talking about it here today. What do you think, Father Murr?
Well, we got two questions going on here. First of all, there are a lot of people. Robert, I can't tell you how many people I get letters from every day. It's amazing. It's amazing. And these are good people with real consciences and looking for truth. They're truth seekers. Many of them have written me telling me that Pope Francis is not the Pope. They reject him completely as Pope. What is my response to that? I fight that completely. I take the time to write each one of them, telling him and her that they're wrong. They're wrong. But do you remember in The Godmother? You remember The Godmother, the book of Mother Pasqualina?
The book that you wrote about the woman who was very close to Pope Pius XII. She was from Germany. She became his housekeeper. When he was nuncio in Germany, she helped him deal with German questions. She was native German speaker. But then he brought her to Rome with him, and she became a power in the Vatican, sort of the gatekeeper to Pope Pius XII.
She certainly was. She was with him as housekeeper and then as personal secretary for 42 years.
And that picture is the book that you wrote about her, because you came to know her unexpectedly, almost providentially, I would say. And that picture shows you blessing her as a young priest in the 1970s.
Actually, Robert, I think that's the third time I said Mass. And I said Mass with Pius XII's vestments that she gave me to say Mass with, and it was a special Mass for her.
And that what
a great woman. My point is here, I tell a lot of stories in that book, The Godmother, behind the scenes sorts of things that happened while she was caring for Eugenio Pacelli, Pius XII. But one of the things that I remember is one day I came in, and there's a point to this story, okay? There's a point to this story. I went in to visit her. I went to her home to visit her, which I did about twice, sometimes 3 times a month. And she showed me a little pamphlet that some people, she said the Austrians, 2 Austrians, an Austrian couple, had just been there to visit her, and they gave her this pamphlet. It was a folded piece of paper. It claimed that, and I think you may have seen this, Robert, it claimed that Pope Paul VI was not really the Pope. He had been kidnapped and replaced with a lookalike who was acting as Pope. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Well, it's absolutely ridiculous. And I started laughing. I had already seen it that had been floating around Rome and different places in Catholic circles. I started laughing. Then I looked at her and I said, Mother Pasqualina, you can't possibly tell me that you're taking this seriously. And she started laughing. She said, of course not. She said, I knew Montini since he was a Monsignor. I know who he is, and that's not the point. And she said this. She said, the point is this, good father. The point is this. These people would rather believe that the Pope has been kidnapped and replaced by someone than that he is actually the Pope and acting the way he is. Wow. She said, that's what I'm trying to tell you with this. All right, let me go back to what we're talking about here. I get a lot of letters and emails from people every day. Many of them are of the opinion that Pope Francis is not the Pope. I combat that as well as I can. He is the Pope. The point is, here's the irony. It would be simpler were he not the Pope. Then we wouldn't have any problems at all with what he's saying or not saying, right? The problem is that he is the Pope. This is the problem. And there's no easy way out of it because he has said some outrageous things. There's no question of that. And many times he's tried to backpedal, but it seems to just get him in deeper. For example, and I'm not going to get bogged down in examples, but here's what I'm talking about. The Pachamama debacle. Pardon me, but I could not believe what I was seeing.
Yeah.
I could not. I still can't believe it. A comment, for example, that hell doesn't exist, that there are no damned in hell, that their souls just disintegrate. And on and I mean, he said all sorts of things like this. Let me tell you something else on a personal note. As soon as he was elected Pope, I was approached by a very large and important book publishing company. And I was asked to translate his talks as Cardinal in Buenos Aires, Archbishop and Cardinal in Buenos Aires, translate them, some selected talks that he gave, into English so that they could be immediately printed, because few people had any idea who this man was, much less his ideas and this, that, and the other thing. I've got to tell you this, Robert. I could not translate his talks. And it's not because I don't speak Spanish and don't understand and read and write Spanish. I do. As a matter of fact, I got to such a point that I called in another Jesuit, native speaking, a Spanish speaker by birth, and another man who is an editor, who is Hispanic. He speaks, his first language is Spanish. The three of us together could not decipher what he was trying to say.
Hmm.
We couldn't end the articles because there weren't any conclusions. And we were racking our brains, truly. We were even trying to help him conclude, trying to help him make a conclusion. Very difficult, very difficult. I've got a theory on that, but I'm not going to take you there yet. Maybe later. But the point is, he said and done some very confusing things. One of the first statements he made also when he was elected Pope, and again, he is the Pope, all right? There's no question of that. But one of the first things that he said when he was elected, he invited young people to hacer un lío, to
make a mess,
to create problems, to create un lío, a mess, right? I mean, I said, what Pope is going to tell people to make a mess? I mean, what are we talking about here? Anyway, he's responsible for a lot of. He's misunderstood, but he himself, I think, has made himself misunderstood. That's the problem. And that's where we're at, right? That's where we're at. So a lot of people have difficulty with him, and they choose, like Mother Pasqualina was telling me with that other example, they choose to say he's not the Pope. They find that easier to deal with than the fact that he is the Pope. I'm saying he certainly is the Pope. There's no question of it. It's going to take a while after he goes to God for canon lawyers and other people to try to unravel and make sense of a lot of things. They're going to have their hands full for a while. However, he is the Pope. He is the Pope. The problem is, it comes down to this. The deposit of faith is everything that we must believe as Catholics. And the Pope, we have to listen to him when he speaks ex cathedra on matters of faith and morals. There's the dilemma. There's the dilemma. What if one thing contradicts the other? What if one thing opposes the other? Then what do we do? Up until now, in my lifetime, I've never seen a pope and the deposit of faith at odds. I've never seen it. You can wonder about a pope's methodology or a little bit the direction he's going, but not that he's having a problem with with confusing articles of faith, causing confusion in them. This is the dilemma we're facing. Yeah. Now, I think I've done well in proposing the problem. You give us the solution.
Well, you have done well in proposing the problem, and you've given us avenues of conversation that could take hours. From the question of sort of confusion of thought in a man who is a good man, even a thoughtful and faithful man, but expressing himself in a confusing way. This is what you say you found in the sermons of Jorge Bergoglio as you tried to translate them.
True.
Now, also, there's the problem of contradiction. Pope Francis has repeatedly said, I am a son of the church, and my intention is to do and teach what the church does and teaches. So he's expressly stated what you said earlier, that this is his task and this is his job, it's his responsibility. But he's been unable, according to many, to carry it out in a clear and persuasive way because they, including the Bishop of Tyler, Texas, Joseph Strickland, now wanting to reject things that he said because they find them confusing and detrimental to the reception of the doctrines of the faith. You did point out that the depositum fidei, the deposit of the faith, is essentially really, at least the center of it is the Easter proclamation. Jesus is risen. The church takes its life and hope and joy and energy from that proclamation, that belief, and that actual reality, the fact. And they place that at the center of the creed. And anyone who would deny that Jesus is risen would be denying a central tenet of the Catholic faith. Then you said that the Trinity is also the nature of the God we saw seen in Jesus is a triune nature. And so we have a creed which speaks, I believe, in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, born of the Virgin Mary. These are all points of doctrine.
Yes.
Suffered under Pontius Pilate. But they're narrating the story of Jesus. The essential center of the creed is the story of Jesus. And what Pope Francis has repeatedly said is that he wants people to encounter Jesus, and that he wants people in the course of that encounter to break through from the colonialization of our minds by this modern world. And in some ways, I find that he's been quite dramatically globalist in certain ways, in certain things that he said. He hasn't gone completely along or even partially along. He's condemned certain aspects of this new globalist catechism or globalist creed. And so it's puzzling repeatedly for me too to understand why his commitment to being a man of the church, to remaining a priest, to being a Jesuit, to teaching as Peter, as the Pope in Rome, who he himself is a part of the extended deposit of the faith, which includes the story and the belief that Peter received the commission from Jesus to defend the faith, and he was handed that task. Henceforward, you're not going to be Simon, but you shall be Peter. And when you have come back fully to the faith, you will confirm your brothers. I've misquoted that, but Peter was given the commission to be the one who confirmed his brothers. This is the Catholic faith. But
yes, I agreed, right? Well, yeah. Would you also agree? Would you also agree that it would be unlike Saint Peter to have 5 of his fellow apostles requiring an answer to some confusion, some points of confusion that he himself, Peter, raised, and not receive an answer in 10 years?
It's
right? Could you imagine a cardinal from China coming, asking just for an explanation what is happening to his country, what's going on, and waiting for 3 days on a chair outside of his office and not being received? This is not the role of the role of the Pope is to clarify. The role of the Pope is not to confuse. We live in a confusing enough world.
Yeah.
We're looking for answers. We're not looking for more confusion. This is what a lot of people, and I'm telling you the truth too, and me, I find this very disconcerting. I really do. I find it very troubling.
Okay.
And it's just something else too, Robert. I'm in contact with a great number of priests, both traditional and very liberal. And when I say very liberal, I mean it.
Okay.
And on both sides, there's a great rejection of Pope Francis's papacy. It just is. All right.
Okay. Quickly, and we'll continue then with this screenshot about what Strickland is rejecting. But first, the four cardinals, there were Brandmuller and Cardinal Burke, Cardinal Meisner, who's passed away, and Cardinal Caffarra, who's passed away from Italy.
Now, I suppose if you just wait long enough, the other two will pass away too.
Yeah. So they, in 2016, proposed five dubia questions. Dubium is a doubt in Latin, or a question. I have a doubt about this, a question. Can you clarify it?
And Robert, may I just interject? And out of deep respect for the Pope,
they prepared.
This was not a gotcha moment. We're gonna catch you in something. We're gonna corner you or something. No, please clarify what you meant.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was what you were referring to when you say, what can we say about a Pope who receives such a question in 2016, and in 2023 he still has not answered? You're saying it's a puzzle, and
these are not people who, I don't know, people just off the street. I mean, these are his fellow bishops, archbishops, and at one time cardinals, brothers in the sacred college.
Yeah.
They're concerned for the faith. They're asking questions of the Pope, which is his role to answer.
Yeah.
This is not outrageous to ask him to clarify something, and especially something of his own creation. Just tell us what you mean by that. And he could have. I'm sure that he could have come up with answers that would have pacified everyone. It would be a little bit difficult for me to do, but I'm sure that he could do it. But nothing.
Yeah. So what we have very clearly as one firm point is that four cardinals, and actually I know a fifth cardinal who said he agreed with the questions, the dubia, but did not sign because he didn't want to go public with his disagreement. Also because he wasn't sure exactly how that would assist or harm the role of Peter. So he was undecided, but he would have been the fifth cardinal to sign it if he had the courage to do so. And I know who he is. But and Cardinal Brandmuller is probably the leading historian from Germany of the history of the Reformation.
Yes.
And of what happened all throughout the 1500s and the struggle to preserve the Catholic faith against the challenge of all sorts of Protestants who raised questions about doctrines of the faith. Brandmuller was a great scholar, is a great scholar. He's in his 90s now, however.
Yes.
So that was that first question. We know that cardinals in the church have had questions about the teaching of Francis and whether it's been confused, whether it's confusing or misleading or not. And they haven't received a full answer. Then we know that Cardinal Zen from China came to Rome and was asking about a decision of the Vatican in 2018 to make a special agreement with the Chinese government, a secret agreement. We still don't know the contents of it. That agreement was renewed twice, after 2 years in 2020 and after 2 more years in 2022, and it will come up again in 2024. What it appears to call for is the control by the Chinese government of the choice of bishops, so that the names that the church is thinking of to make bishops of the Catholic Church in China are proposed to the Chinese government, and they can strike off the list anyone they do not wish to be a bishop. And we might
in other words, the Chinese communist, atheist government can name Catholic bishops.
Well,
in China.
they can ensure
Propose.
they can ensure that the list that the Pope chooses the name from is to their pleasure.
Well, could you see, Robert, how Cardinal Zen might find that upsetting?
Yeah, and what you referred to as an old man sitting on a chair outside the Pope's door, Cardinal Zen came to Rome at 90 years old and still very vigorous and in a clear mind. And he's been a wonderful Catholic cardinal in China all these years. And he asked to meet the Pope, and the Pope said he was unable to meet with him. The request was not accepted. But that's not a doctrinal decision. That's another type of decision. But in those two cases of the dubia and the 4 cardinals and of the Cardinal Zen, you've pointed out things that Pope Francis has done that have raised questions. And now Bishop Strickland has taken it perhaps to a new level, but it's not yet clear how serious this is. Let's look again at what Bishop Strickland is saying and try to determine whether we've got the start here of a revolution, because Bishop Strickland is a bishop, not just someone like myself or yourself, a layman or a priest. And the bishop has teaching authority in the church. This is a story by Michael Lewis, who runs the website Where Peter Is, and he's very, very supportive of Pope Francis. And he's very antagonistic here, or critical here, toward Bishop Strickland and what Strickland did. Let's read what he says here. Joseph Strickland, he starts by characterizing him as the highly conservative Bishop of Tyler, Texas. No, highly controversial. So he sets him already up here as, announced Friday evening on Twitter. So that's when this started, May 12th, Friday night. Quote, I believe Pope Francis is the Pope, but it is time for me to say that I reject his program of undermining the deposit of faith. Follow Jesus, close quote. Well, Father, I know your mind is turning here as you read what Strickland said. Can we take apart what he said and say how we regard his attitude toward Pope Francis and towards the doctrine of the faith? Is he doing something here that he ought not to have done? Is saying something he ought not to have said?
I have, in all honesty, this is basically what I've been telling people for 10 years. I told you before, I've gotten thousands of emails and letters from people and telephone calls. I don't know how they get my telephone number, but they do. Anyway,
I'm not giving it out.
And these are good people. They're very good people. They're very concerned about what they consider this confusion in the air. The only thing that I can tell them is the following. You know what the Catholic Church teaches. And if you don't know, it's high time you learn. Get a catechism. The Catechism of the Catholic Church is a beautiful document. Take it, follow it. The footnotes alone are worth the price of the book. Fantastically footnoted. Learn your faith. That is what you're held to believe.
Well, we're gonna bring the catechism on here in just a moment on this question.
All right. Well, but that's my answer to them, and it's very much the same that the bishop is giving. Yes, we believe he's the Pope. Yes, there's no problem. But when it comes down to confusion that to some degree he himself is causing, where do we go for an answer? He refuses to give an answer, a clear answer. Then we go back to the deposit of the faith. We go back to what our faith teaches, and we hold firm to that. That's what we believe in.
Okay. There's 3 points that I'd like to quickly make. We notice in this tweet that he's citing something else. Quote, Patrick Coffin has challenged the authenticity of the Pope Francis, close quote. So this debate and controversy began really with Patrick Coffin challenging the authenticity of Pope Francis. And Strickland's first point in his tweet is, if this is accurate, I disagree. I believe Pope Francis is the Pope.
Right.
So he's going, he's putting out one statement in reaction to a challenge to the authenticity of Pope Francis and denying that, as a bishop might be expected to do, a bishop in the Catholic Church. So in a sense, for his bona fides as a bishop and in a way supporter of Pope Francis are given right there. I believe Pope Francis is the Pope. Then he adds a but. So he's coming across as if he's trying to explain, perhaps in part, why Patrick Coffin may have gone down this road. He adds a second thought, but it is time, because this controversy has arisen and he has to take the position to defend the authenticity of Francis. But it is time for me to say, it's almost as if he were saying, it's time for me to add, having said that he's authentic, I must add that I reject his program of undermining the deposit of faith. Now, we'd have to know what program precisely he's referring to determine what he is saying here, and to what extent he's correct in saying that that program is one of undermining the deposit of faith. And then he concludes, follow Jesus. As a disciple of Jesus, as a bishop, he points to Jesus. Now let's go further down. So that's the tweet that this article is criticizing. Let's go.
All right.
With this tweet, Bishop Strickland appears to have finally crossed the line into direct and explicit opposition to Pope Francis and his teaching authority. Now, is that statement true? Did Bishop Strickland cross the line into direct and explicit opposition to Pope Francis? Is it true that he crossed it? And if he did, is Strickland incorrect? What if something that Francis is doing is diminishing or confusing the deposit of the faith? That's not, nobody is debating, no one is clarifying that right here. It's just whether Bishop Strickland is supporting Francis 100% or has crossed the line into direct and explicit opposition to Pope Francis. I would say, I'll answer my own question and then let you talk. I've talked too much. He does not say he's in opposition to Pope Francis. He says he's in opposition to Pope Francis's program. So right there, there's a distinction that should be made. Father Carlo.
Well, yes. Yeah. I mean, who doesn't agree with that? I certainly agree with it. I say I offer Mass every day. Every day I include Pope Francis in the canon of the Mass. He's the Pope. There's no question of that. However, I have difficulty with him not being clear. Now, let me pose a theoretical question. All right. What would be your reaction if a Pope came out and explicitly said, there is no deposit of faith? then what would you do, Robert? What would your reaction to that be?
Well, I
Now,
would.
just a minute. You've got a legitimate pope who we owe all of our respect and loyalty to as vicar of Christ on earth, vice president of the church. Jesus Christ is the president, all right, on earth, vice president, and vicar of Christ, and successor of St. Peter. So he's owed a great deal of respect, and what he says has a weight that nobody's remarks have. But what if he said, there is no such thing as the deposit of faith? Now you've got the Pope, and you've got a rejection of the deposit of faith, which I'm telling people to hold on to. What if he would say that? What would you do in that situation? This may sound like a very Jesuitical question posed by the Jesuits in the 1950s and 60s, when we knew such a thing could never possibly exist. However, today we're not so sure. What would you do? How would you react to that, Robert?
Well, I would have to first say to myself, has he got some idea of the problem with understanding words and defining them and using them, that we each have a different meaning for a word God, or a word born, or a word crucified? Is he kind of a philosopher of linguistics or semiotics who is arguing that words are so hard to share, as you and I are trying to talk to each other now, and we're trying to understand each other's ideas, and I'm trying to answer your question. I would wonder if the Pope was expressing some thought and was going to add, there's no deposit of the faith in words that are universally and immediately understood in the same way that the Holy Spirit can enter the heart of a child or of an old person and illuminate and convert them from self-centeredness, and that the deposit of the faith that we have is the best that we can do, but it's not the living word of Scripture itself, because the creed is not Scripture. I would perhaps start that way, but that's because I'm sort of an intellectual, and perhaps foolishly so, overeducated, but not too smart. I would nevertheless have serious questions about whether this Pope was abandoning the faith. That would be the second.
But let me be clear. I'm not saying that he said that or that he thinks that.
No,
I'm proposing a theory.
Yeah.
If it came down to either the Pope you listen to, or the deposit of faith that's 2,000 years old, that's everything that we believe, the faith of our fathers, as we used to sing that beautiful hymn, faith of our fathers living still in spite of everything, living still. If those two were in direct conflict, what would you do? And I'm telling people who have a difficulty, and a lot of difficulties, with this Pope I'm not saying ignore him. I'm simply saying, let him be over here. You study your faith, get to know your faith, what your faith teaches, which is Jesus Christ. Your faith is Jesus Christ. It is him and everything important about him. It is the deposit of faith is not everything in the world, but it's everything that we need to know for our salvation. It's not everything that exists. It doesn't have the answers to everything. It is exactly what we need to know for our salvation. I would tend to go that route and hold on to that, and put in a secondary place a man who's giving opinions about different things. And mind you, he's not speaking ex cathedra. He's not speaking officially either, right? So, I mean, we'll give him that. These are simply his opinions.
Hmm.
Now we can go back to Vatican I. We can go
Yeah.
back to the First Vatican Council
Yeah.
and look at papal infallibility, which,
Yeah.
you know what, I think ironically, Robert, and I think this is a great thing. We are, as Catholics, are maturing a lot. And I think if this Pope has done nothing else, he has helped us mature in our own faith, because people have got to learn their own faith and know their own faith. And I think we've been lazy for many, many, many years, centuries maybe, in knowing our faith and defending it. We leave that to the priests. We leave that to Monsignori in the Vatican. No, that's the responsibility of every Catholic, of every baptized Catholic, to know his faith, right? And I think this is a very good opportunity. I know a lot of people that I've talked to and kind of counseled have purchased catechisms, have started listening to talks. I'm telling you, as much junk as there is on online, there are some really beautiful programs and very beautiful instructions on the Catholic faith they're magnificent. I
Hmm.
never saw things like that when I was growing up, and they're there and they're solid. It's meat and potatoes. I mean, it's real. It's not fluff. It's real
Yeah.
stuff. And they're beautiful. We've got all sorts of things at our fingertips. It's time to grow up. It's time to know your faith. And I'm telling people too, if you really knew your faith, you wouldn't be rattled by half the things you hear.
Yeah.
You just wouldn't
Well,
be.
actually, that's our position, you and I, and we are not rattled by anything that's happened, and we recognize that the name of the Pope, or one of the names, is Servus Servorum Dei. Servus is the servant or even the slave. Servus Servorum, servant of the servants Dei of God. The Pope is the servant of the servants of God. His essential work is to be the servant of all and to focus us on the deposit of the faith, which should focus us on Jesus. We should be Christocentric in our lives,
Absolutely.
in
Absolutely.
our thinking, and because we start, this we call this the treasure, this knowledge of Christ, or the knowledge of the salvation of Christ, or the knowledge of the saving story of Christ's life, death, and resurrection. We call this the treasure. And what Paul says is, we have this treasure in earthen vessels, in vessels of clay. That's our bodies and our minds. In other words, all human beings have nothing to glory about except the fact of Christ, of Mary, of God. To God alone be the glory is the great phrase. Even if we've understood many languages and many centuries of history, there's no glory in it because we are very flawed and very imperfect vessels of truth. Well, I wanted to take a look at the Code of Canon Law to see what the role of the Pope is, the role of this servant of the servants of God. And under the Code of Canon Law, Book 2, The People of God, which this is already the revised code of John Paul II's pontificate, 1982 or 3. The hierarchical constitution of the church, that means according to our law, there is a hierarchy. And the hierarchy starts with that word on top, the Roman pontiff, and under the college of bishops, and these various things. And under section 1 of this Canon 330 is the supreme authority of the church. Chapter 1, the Roman pontiff and the college of bishops, Canon 330. Just as by the Lord's decision, St. Peter and the apostles constitute one college, so in a like manner, the Roman pontiff, the successor of Peter, and the bishops, the successors of the apostles, are united among themselves. So This is true, and Mike Lewis is correct. Where Peter is, we find security. And with the bishops, who are the successors of the apostles, we also find doctrinal security. And that's the danger and confusion we
or certainly should.
We should.
Yes.
And that's the danger and confusion we find now with this disagreement between the Bishop of Tyler, Texas, Joseph Strickland, and the Bishop of Rome, Pope Francis. Now we're going to talk about the Roman Pontiff. Canon 331. The Bishop of the Roman Church, in whom continues the office given by the Lord uniquely to Peter, the first of the apostles, and to be transmitted to his successors, is the head of the College of Bishops, the Vicar of Christ, and the pastor of the universal church on earth. By virtue of his office, he possesses supreme, full, immediate, and universal ordinary power in the church, which he is always able to exercise freely. Any comment on that? How are we to understand this?
Well, it's simple to understand. I think it's very simple to understand. Though people who canonists and lawyers would like to make it a little bit more, they would like to dress it up a little bit more. It comes down to this. Yes, all of the bishops have authority in the world. Yes, they are the magisterium. Only when they are in agreement with the Bishop of Rome, with the Pope. And the Pope also can act independent of every one of them. That's what it comes down to. All right.
All right.
Now there are people who are going to say, no. Fine. That's what it comes down to, and that's what it's been defined as throughout the centuries. Collegiality was the big word in the Second Vatican Council. That was the one of the key words that was thrown around all of the time. Collegiality. Yes. And the Pope can take into account, and he really should, according to my humble opinion, the opinions of every bishop in the world. He should, but he doesn't have to. He can also act independent. All right. So his is, as you read before, it's the supreme authority.
Okay. The next canon speaks of his election. He receives this power when he accepts his legitimate election, together with the episcopal consecration. If the person elected lacks episcopal character, however, he is to be ordained a bishop immediately. There's the sentence that, as we all who have studied this know, means that even a non-bishop could be elected pope.
That was put in. I don't know exactly when this was put in, but it was put in by Cardinal Benelli, Archbishop Benelli at the time, who insisted with Pope Paul, and Pope Paul agreed. You don't do anything without the Pope agreeing, that anyone who would be elected Pope, you just have to be a baptized male, a baptized Catholic male, to be eligible to be elected Pope. However, at the moment you're elected Pope, Benelli insisted you had to be a bishop. You had to be bishop because you are Bishop of Rome. Yeah. So he that was changed then. That was done like in 1976, I think it was.
Well, would you be willing to return to Rome, Father Murr?
Would I be willing to return to Rome? Not on your life.
All right. We'll see what the Holy Spirit says. If it happens that the Roman Pontiff resigns his office, this is the canon that, or the canon paragraph, Canon 332, paragraph 2. This controls what Pope Benedict did. If it happens that the Roman Pontiff resigns his office, it is required for validity that the resignation is made freely and properly manifested, but not that it is accepted by anyone. So you can't be forced out of office. You can't be frightened or compelled or tortured and then say, okay, I accept no longer being Pope. You have to do it freely, and you have to manifest that properly. And that was done in the statement that he made on February 11th,
Right.
2013. Now we come to Canon 333, paragraph 1. By virtue of his office, the Roman pontiff not only possesses power over the universal church, but also obtains the primacy of ordinary power over all particular churches and groups of them. Moreover, this primacy strengthens and protects the proper ordinary and immediate power which bishops possess in the particular churches entrusted to their care. How do we interpret this?
Just what I said before.
Okay.
The Pope, and you can go through all of them and you're going to come up with the same conclusion, that the Pope has supreme authority over everyone, and everything in the church. He is answerable to God.
Right.
He has to answer to God. There's no question of that. And he should really be. There was a great line in a movie that I saw years ago. I can't remember the name of it. It doesn't matter, but it was about the Pope and the Roman Curia.
Mm-hmm.
And one of his Secretary of State in that movie said, the Pope said, "Oh, I know, it was Shoes of a Fisherman." I think that was it. Shoes of a Fisherman with Anthony Quinn, right? He said, so it's up to me as Pope to make all of these decisions. And his Secretary of State said, "Yes, and it's my job to oppose you when you're wrong." Right? So, I mean, look, we've always, the human element of the church is marvelous. It's marvelous. And we are humans, and the Pope is also a human being, and he needs, and he wants, I'm sure, not just the support, but also the input of bishops. I don't know a Pope who would say, "No, I need nobody's help. I'm independent. I'm a dictator. I'm going to do this." Even the book, talking about the dictator Pope, that was very unfair. There is no Pope who's really a dictator. There are popes that are strong in wanting to get the church back on course, sure, but they're not dictators. I don't know of any Pope. Well, I shouldn't say that. I know a couple in history who listened to no one. I shouldn't say that. There were a couple, but they weren't long-lived. But most of the popes that we have are intelligent men who listen to advice. They seek advice. They're not just acting on their own or whimsically.
Well,
right?
that's precisely what the next paragraph says. Paragraph 2 under Canon 333. In fulfilling the office of Supreme Pastor of the Church, the Roman Pontiff is always joined in communion with the other bishops and with the universal church. This is the law.
Yes.
So some of the concerns that are expressed by the more conservative cardinals or by Bishop Strickland would be taken into account. He is always joined in communion with the other bishops and with the universal church. He nevertheless has the right, according to the needs of the church, to determine the manner, whether personal or collegial, of exercising this office. And then the next sentence, no appeal or recourse is permitted against a sentence or decree of the Roman Pontiff.
Well, there you have it, I think, in one sentence. Everything we've been looking for is really capsulized right there. Now, just a minute. Does that mean that no one can disagree with the Pope?
Well, you talked about a Secretary of State who said
right.
that he would
and also I'll tell you about a priest and a layman. They can all disagree with the Pope on his opinions of different matters. We are obliged, and so are the bishops, all the faithful are obliged to listen to him when speaking ex cathedra, officially from the chair, on matters of faith and morals. Otherwise, he can have an opinion and I can have my opinion. See, this is the problem that we go right back to Vatican I. This was the problem that St. John Henry Newman proposed in the First Vatican Council. He said, "It's not that I'm against when the vote came up for papal infallibility, right? To put it in layman's terms, when that came up to vote, he was opposed to it, and other bishops also were opposed to it.
That's important.
Not because they opposed papal infallibility." And he made that clear, St. John Henry Newman. He said, "It's not that I oppose the idea of infallibility. That's not the reason. What I am afraid of is that by doing this, from now on, every Catholic will think that he's obliged to listen to the Pope as if every single thing the Pope opines on is true and has to be believed." Well, excuse me, but in the 1940s and 1950s, this is the way we were almost educated. I'm sorry to say. The Pope said it, the end of discussion. Roma lacuta, causa finita. Rome is spoken, the case is ended, done, finished. Well, no, that's not what it's saying at all. That's not what it's saying at all. And this is the problem that we're still living in. We can't divide the man's opinion from his official teaching. And that is something we have to grow up about. We have to mature in that area. Okay, that's my whole point.
Well, you've made a very profound point now, and it may be the summation of this entire discussion. You've said that the church in the 40s and 50s was teaching a kind of blind obedience to every thought and declaration of the Pope, kind of a hyper-papalism. The Second Vatican Council came and dealt with the question of the bishops, which hadn't been completed at the First Vatican Council.
Collegiality.
And then we went into this turbulent age that we've lived through. All of us have lived through this with certain attempts to update, to modernize, to make more accessible the teachings of the church to the modern world.
Right.
And now we have, we saw how Pope Paul VI tried to do it, John Paul I. We saw how John Paul II tried to do it. And there were concerns on a couple of occasions about things that he decided. We saw Benedict XVI make his decisions as he tried to carry forward this project of teaching the faith, but making it understandable to the modern world.
Yes.
And now we've watched Francis do it. And the conclusion that I come to from what you just said is that the effect of what Francis has done has been to throw the lay people and the priests back on their own resources. And if Francis had desired to do it as a part of his teaching authority, that is, to break the hyper-papalism of what you described in the 40s and 50s, of listening to every word or phrase of the Pope with complete devotion and approval. We know that if Francis says, "I'm a fan of the San Lorenzo soccer team in Buenos Aires, and they are the best team in the world," we know that all of us immediately believe that, don't we?
Well, anybody with any sense would have to disagree because it's Lazio. That's that.
Lazio, who just won? No, Napoli. Who just won this? I think for the first time, Naples has won the championship in the Italian soccer.
But look, Robert, let's go to this. The Pope said, Papa Bergoglio said not too long ago that I don't want to. I really shouldn't misquote him on this because it's kind of serious. But he said something like, "Souls don't go to hell. Those who are damned, they disintegrate." He used the word, they disintegrate before they get there. They turn into nothing. Somebody gets 2 or 3 or 4 priests called me and they said, "What is he?" I said, "What are you upset about?" "Well, he just said that." I said, "So what? So what? That's his opinion. That's Jorge Bergoglio's opinion, period. He wasn't speaking as the Pope. That's it. He might like Fords and I like Chevrolets. So what?
Right.
It just doesn't matter. See, this is if he's done anything. I shouldn't put it that way. If he's done anything good, I don't mean it that way. One good thing that he's done is he's laid waste to that idea that the Pope is just absolutely infallible from the time he's awake until the time he goes to bed at night.
Yeah.
And everything he says, if he likes cherry pie, you shouldn't like apple pie. Come on, this is ridiculous. And this is the way we lived to a great degree. We really did. Yeah. Everything that he opined, that was the way it was. Well, it's not. So and this is a good time. I keep saying it's a very good time for us to mature in our own Catholic faith.
So do we consider Bishop Strickland to be giving somehow a useful warning or criticism to Pope Francis, the way you might give a criticism to your own father if he was doing something that was leading him into difficulty?
I think so. I think that would be a good way to look at it. But let me play the prophet here. Let me play the prophet just for a moment. I can almost guarantee that after Pope Francis has gone to his eternal reward, you will hear a criticism of his pontificate like you've never heard, from sources that you wouldn't believe. Why do I say that? Because that's what happened when John the 23rd died. It's what happened when Pius the 12th died. It's what happened when Paul the 6th died. It's what happened when John Paul the 2nd died. All of the people were quiet, and then all of a sudden this criticism, and you're saying to yourself, where were all these critics for 20 years, for 30 years? They were always there. They just didn't speak up. I think Bishop Strickland, the reason I admire him very much, I have for years, I like a straight shooter. I like a man who speaks his mind. I like a man who's frank, who says what he's thinking, because that's the way you can deal with people. For 10 years, I lived in Rome. And for the majority of those years, I had to work and live with people who worked and lived in the Roman Curia. And believe me, you didn't know when they said good morning if there wasn't a tornado coming. I'm not saying that they were liars. They just didn't respect the truth the same way I did. And they didn't speak clearly. They were taught not to speak clearly. And we have a lot of this in the clergy, a lot of that in the clergy. As a matter of fact, this is what Pope Francis despises most about the clergy, is this clericalism. It's also a way of speaking, a way of thinking, a way of interpreting, and a way of communicating. And a lot of it is rotten. It's rotten. And I'm glad that he attacks that. So I don't know where I'm going with all this, but yes, you'll see that his critics are not just Bishop Strickland of Tyler, Texas, when he dies.
Yeah,
it will rain criticism.
But the further point, though, is that in a certain sense, Bishop Strickland is doing a service.
I think so. Why would you be afraid of having a discussion about the question that I just posed? If you have a pope who would in theory say this, and the deposit of faith that says that, what do you do? What do you do when they're in direct conflict? Well, nobody even poses the question because they're all afraid. Afraid of what? I don't get it. I think that there should be a lot more. Pope Francis is talking about the need for dialogue. That word used to drive me crazy in the 1960s. That's all we ever heard. Dialogue. Fine. Very few clerics do I know who ever dialogued. Seriously, bishops who sat down and listened to their people or listened to their priests even. I've seen it very rarely. When I've seen it, it was remarkable, marvelous, but it's not something that happens every day. This is one of the things that Pope Francis criticizes. And he's very right. He's very right to criticize it. So I think if nothing else, he certainly opened up, he told people to make a mess. Okay, well, good. Here's a mess. Now, How do we derive from it? What do we conclude? And I think we're learning a lot of good things. I really do.
All right. So I just want to conclude with this question again. Mike Lewis, this website Where Peter Is, writes, the Catechism of the and he's critical of Strickland. He thinks Strickland should repent of what he tweeted. That he.
I don't know Mike Lewis, but I'll take your word.
He says the Catechism. He's writing here. The Catechism of the Catholic Church defines schism as the refusal of submission to the Roman Pontiff, or
in what?
Communion with the members of the Church subject to him.
Yes, just a minute. Refusal to submit to him in what?
Well, that's the point, exactly.
That's exactly my point. And and if you're telling me this is the problem that I'm having, and I brought up the question many times. If you're telling me that I have to choose between the deposit of faith, of my Catholic faith, and a particular pope, well, I'm not going to say what the answer is. I know what the answer is. I know which direction I'll go. However, this is the problem. This is the problem, and nobody's discussing it.
Okay, if we go further down this article, we come to a paragraph which says, sources have confirmed that they have relayed this information. The information that Strickland is rejecting some of the program of Pope Francis and attacking as heretical some of the teachings of his brother bishops and cardinals. Sources have confirmed that they have relayed this information to the papal nuncio to the United States, Archbishop Christophe Pierre, but an immediate response is unlikely considering the late hour. And
that's exactly what I was telling you about clerical talk, considering the late hour. So we won't hear about it for 3 years now, considering the late hour. It's ridiculous.
Well, okay. The real question that I have is, how preoccupied are we that there could be a rebellion among bishops against Pope Francis, or how, on the other hand, should we praise and support the truth speaking of some bishops in a situation in which the Pope himself has called on everyone to make a mess?
Well, here's what I would answer to that. It's the Pope himself, Jorge Bergoglio, Pope Francis himself, who has invited free-thinking dialogue.
Yeah.
He's asking everyone's opinion. He's having synods on synods. He's having synods on synods on synods. Good. Looking for everybody's opinion. What in the world would bother him by receiving an opinion contrary to his own? I mean, what does he really expect that all of this synod on synodality and the synods are meeting all over the place, that they're all holding his opinions? Is that what he expects? Then what kind of synodality is that? What kind of synods are those? It's ridiculous. And I don't believe he believes that. I believe he really wants people to give him honest answers. Well, he's getting one. And if more bishops were more honest, he'd be getting an awful lot more too. Because it's not just Strickland. I happen to know that. It's not just Strickland who puts in question a lot of things that Pope Francis is saying and doing. Not just him.
So you're making the double point that the bishops of the Roman Catholic Church should be more honest and more courageous, especially if they have constructive critiques of things they feel are going wrong in the church.
Certainly.
And at the same time, Pope Francis ought to appreciate that because he's called for it, and it may even help him to perform his office more effectively.
Of course. Why would you call for something and then not want it?
All right.
I mean, I believe he's sincere. I believe Pope Francis is sincere when he calls for the synod and says, I want answers. I want answers to these questions. Great. Well, here are the answers. And many of them are in disagreement with you, Holy Father, and your opinions. But you asked. I mean, I don't understand the problem. If he wants honesty, what is the key word he used to love? Transparency.
Mhm.
He wants transparency. Well, okay. Look, I just wrote a book on Cardinal Gagnon's visit to the Roman official papal visitation to the Roman Curia for 3 years. And in my book, I asked Pope Francis politely, but I think I have a right to ask him. He's my father, my spiritual father. I asked him to release the report, Gagnon's report. You too, Robert, went to see Gagnon to ask him the same question. Where is the report? Can we see the report? Well,
Yes.
It's 50 years almost. It's
Yeah.
time. What are you afraid of? And I said to him, look, you're asking for transparency. I'd like transparency too. Why don't you show what's in the report? Right? Anyway, no answer.
Well,
This is what I not on who cares what I think? I'm not important, but I'm telling you, there are loads of bishops and loads of priests and tons of laity all over the world who are not happy with the way things are. And they would like transparency, and they would like honesty, and they would like dialogue.
Okay.
You're not seeing it.
So to wrap this up, we live in a world of many problems and of great beauty, and we're fallible human beings. We hear the message of Jesus Christ. Speaking of a kingdom not of this world, we try to conform our hearts, and we avail ourselves of the teachings and sacraments of the church to approach a higher and deeper truth and beauty, which provides joy. And this church, nevertheless, is in great struggle with the modern world, which seems to want to eliminate all these teachings, all these ideas of blessedness. How do we then summarize the method and the path that we ought to undertake? And what is your final statement today to our listeners?
This might even sound like a cop-out. I don't think it is. I would invite everyone, especially the laity who confess a profound state of confusion with the state of things in the church, with the state of things in the world also. It's time to study and time to know your faith. Yes, pray. Yes, fast. Yes, do penance. Yes. But also open a book. Also take time to learn your faith, because it's to everyone's. Actually, we're all obliged to know and to practice our faith, to know it well. And I think the problems that I'm getting from a lot of people who are in correspondence with me is that they really don't know their own faith. Therefore, they're shattered with anything that's said. Well, it's not that way. It's not that way. It's easier. I don't know Mr. Lewis, but I congratulate him for the article that he wrote, as I congratulate Bishop Strickland for the position that he took. I like this. This is what we're supposed to be doing. This is what Pope Francis is inviting the church since he became Pope to do, to dialogue, to look at things from both sides. I think this is very healthy. And I think there should be more of it. And I think it should never end. That's what I think.
Don Carlo, it's wonderful to speak with you again. And I think we'll be...
Robert, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. And I'm so glad that you returned from your pilgrimages safe and sound. And you look healthier for it.
Thank you.
God love you, sir. Listen, we'll meet again. We'll meet again real soon, okay?
All right.
God willing.
Thank you.
God.